Hey, good evening and welcome to the Gender Speaker live show. It's Sunday night and tonight I'm talking about Section 28, part of my weekly LGBT history show. So let's get going. Yeah, and welcome to my LGBT history show. I missed last week. Last week was a really busy week and a whole bunch of things going on. So the whole of last week got written off, but we're back and definitely going to be back on Wednesday. Got a lively show coming up on Wednesday with quite a few guests, but I'll talk a bit about that later. But tonight, it's the Section 28. I was thinking about that because it's about the 23rd anniversary of the repeal coming up in a few days. And it's been Section 28, I think about it, that was long, it wasn't that long ago. It was only a few years ago, but it wasn't. It was 1988. So let's have a look at it. Section 28 of the Local Government Act. This was a piece of legislation brought in 1988 in Margaret Thatcher's Conservative government. And it really was probably the worst piece of legislation that could have been brought in. We've got to think back to the 1980s. The 1980s, we had seen the HIV/AIDS issue going on, and that had been very much pushed as a gay disease. We all know now that it wasn't. It just happened to hit the gay community. They were particularly susceptible and vulnerable, but obviously, most of Africa has suffered badly from HIV/AIDS, and it's still there, despite the fact nobody talks about it anymore. It is a treatable disease. It's not going to basically affect your life, but it's going to put people on medication for most of their lives. And there's evidence of some people actually now beginning to show no signs of HIV after the treatment. But Section 28 came in the midst of that. So right the way through the 1980s was this growing animosity by conservatives, by right-wing people against the gay community. And much of what happened around that caused Section 28 actually happened in 1983. The Daily Mail came across a book called Jenny Lives with Eric and Martin. It was simply a book about a young girl who had two dads, gay parents, and it was presenting gay families as an alternative to a normal family. And if you think about the challenges and problems for a young child at school, if a child has trans parents, gay parents, lesbian parents, homosexual parents, and they go to school and they talk about their family, and especially young kids draw pictures about their family and their mum and dad. Well, some kids draw pictures about their dad and their mum and their mum. And it starts to get confusing. So what do you do to try to explain this to the other kids in the class that Jenny lives with Eric and Martin? And so there were a number of books being produced to help create an atmosphere of normality about it. Well, a particular conservative lord really took exception to this. I was trying to find her name, but I couldn't actually find it. Doesn't really matter. And she campaigned, and a whole bunch of quite well-known Tories got behind it, including Margaret Thatcher, who was really opposed to the idea that basically we had an unalienable right to be gay. She felt that it was wrong. There was a strong sense that somehow this was a lifestyle choice and that we were corrupting children, that these books going into schools would corrupt children and persuade them to be gay. We do know that this is all rubbish, but there are still people who believe this. There are still people who try to enforce Section 28, even though it's no longer available. By the way, Section 28 was never a criminal act, but it actually had some impact. Let's just have a look at what happened. Essentially, what they were trying to do was to stop what they saw as gay propaganda getting into schools and kids' minds being twisted by this gay agenda to turn everybody gay. Why everybody thought that was the case, I have no idea, but it's just about trying to not demonize and discriminate against kids and teachers and people who are gay within schools. And you have to stop it early. If you allow discrimination, harassment, victimization to become part of a culture as people, by the time people have left school, it's part of their lives. It's really hard to shake it when people are adults, but you can change things when people are young. Anyway, everything started to pick up to really bring about this Section 28 of the Local Government Act, which was a prevention, a single clause in the bill that stopped people. And I'll just look at the actual wording of it here. So no local authorities shall not intentionally promote homosexuality or publish material with the intention of promoting homosexuality or promote the teaching in any maintained school of the acceptability of homosexuality. It's quite severe, isn't it? And basically saying, you can't talk about it. And what this meant was that local authorities would no longer be able to fund any kind of, voluntary organization that was set up to support gay people. Bearing in mind at this time, you could be sacked for being gay. You could be sacked from work for being trans. Your family could reject you. Kids would go to university, come out when they're at university, and their parents would refuse to allow them to come home. Life was not good for gay people. Police were constantly harassing and victimizing. Decriminalization had taken place in 1967, but it was still very much a negative image in the minds of a lot of the public. And because of AIDS, it had become even more so. There were people arguing for all gay people to be sent into some kind of like leper colonies. Difficult to imagine now, but this is what was actually going on there. So as this law was beginning to put together, it basically resulted in a big march, 20,000, 25,000, numbers are a bit variable on this, marched in Manchester. Actors Michael Cashman and Ian McKellen both came out as gay. They had been secretly gay. And again, you've got to remember, most pop stars, this was a time when people like David Bowie, David Bowie had come out quite early, but Elton John was a long time before he came out. And it was in the 80s when most pop stars began to start saying, okay, fine, I'm going to come out and support it. But a lot of people didn't want to. There was a huge fear that if they came out, that would be the end of their career. They wouldn't get parts because everybody was terrified of allowing it. Michael Cashman was the first actor to play a gay role in a soap opera. So we come to May 1988, which is when everything was being discussed in the House of Lords. This was in the Commons and the Lords. Lots of campaigns. The big march that went on. A group of lesbians abseiled down into the House of Lords from the visitors' gallery in protest because the Lords had voted in favour of this to support this particular bill. When the bill was passed, a group of lesbians stormed the BBC newsroom, handcuffed themselves, or at least one of them handcuffed themselves to the news desk in protest to try and bring attention of the public what was going on. So there we were, May 1988, the law was in place. And it really brought about a difficult period of time for the whole of the 90s. Essentially, it was not okay to be gay. And because the government had this in place, it was like the government saying, we don't agree with homosexuality. We think it's not normal. And if you think about that promotion, that words, that not intentionally promote homosexuality. Don't publish materials with the intention of promoting. So there was no LGBT support around. It was really a big fight to get anything. And I know when I first came out as trans, which was late 90s, I was, very secret during this period of time. I knew that if I come out in the 1980s, my job would have been over. And I wasn't being gay, it was being trans, but it was treated in very much the same way. The focus was on homosexuality, but trans and lesbianism were just as badly treated. Teachers were afraid to come out at school because they wouldn't get the support of the school. They'd probably be sacked, and it was perfectly okay for someone to be sacked. In fact, in the 90s, one of the court cases that went around as a trans person was sacked from the council, working in the council, because they told somebody that they cross-dressed at the weekend and went out to clubs. And because they told a customer of the council, they were sacked for that. And that ended up being a court case which they lost because they tried to battle it for unfair dismissal, and they lost the case. And it was what started the role of a whole bunch of cases going to the European Court of Human Rights in the 1990s, which is when we started to see lots of action, because across Europe, there was a very much more positive attitude arising against LGBT people. In 1989, the most important thing was Michael Cashman, Ian McKenna, and a group of other people founded Stonewall. It's a campaigning charity. Its role was to campaign against Section 28. That was the primary objective. That was everything that they were trying to do. When I came out to Hull and came out in 2001, our first Hull Pride, the first march that happened from Hull Pride, was a protest march against Section 28. And we marched around the town, it wasn't about lots of people being lively and having fun and a big party. This was a political protest. And all of the gay pride marches which had gone throughout the 1990s, the primary focus of them all throughout the whole of the 1990s, London Pride, Manchester Pride, was always against Section 28. And it was a strong battle. 1997, the Labour Party came in, and we knew that that would bring about the changes, because through that sort of 13 years that the Labour Party were in power, from 97 until 2010, when David Cameron won the election, that period, right through the noughties, if you like, was the biggest period of positive change in LGBT legislation in the history of the UK, probably bigger than any other country in the world. There had been a number of cases that had gone to the European Court of Human Rights, but nothing had been turned into legislation. Well, very quickly after the Labour Party came in, they passed the Human Rights Act, which meant that now you didn't have to go to the European Court of Human Rights to challenge anything that had a human rights issue. You could take it straight to a local tribunal, straight to a local court. And that made the whole process of battling for human rights issues much, much easier in this country. Sadly, there's talk of it going back the way it was, to having to go to taking a case to the European Court of Human Rights costs about a couple of £100,000. It's a really expensive process. Taking it to a tribunal or to a local Crown Court is not, and they can handle those cases easily. We don't need them so much now because the law is already on our side, so we're not battling against the law. But back then, the problem was that in almost every case, the law was stacked against the people. So what you were doing was battling the government. And the only way to do that was to go to the European Court of Human Rights and have a decision made against them. Eventually, in year 2000, Section 28 was repealed in Scotland. It failed to repeal in the UK. I still couldn't get all the support, despite the enormous amount of support coming to Labour from the mining, not just the miners' unions, but basically unions. And that had all happened in 1984. You may remember 1984 was the year of the miners' strike. And it was a year, if you've seen the movie, which I thought miners, I think it was, I can't remember the name of the movie now, but anyway, it's the movie about the small group of LGBT group in Wales that decided they were going to support miners in their claim for better treatment. And that brought about a very difficult bit of conflict between miners who were very, very staunchly traditional, suddenly getting lots of support from a gay group, and actually finding that relationship where it went well. Very good movie. If I can remember the name, I'll try and put it in the notes. 2003 finally repealed Section 28. At the same time, in that same period, it became illegal to, 1999, it became illegal to sack someone if they were trans, and it was illegal to sack someone if they were gay, and it was illegal to deny service to anyone because they were gay. And eventually, 2008, we finally got to the same rights for trans people, that it was illegal to deny service to anyone there. So there have been continuous changes, civil partnerships 2004, equal marriage in 2012. So we have changed most of those laws. It's been a long and tough battle. We've still got some challenges and battles going on. But, Stonewall, now probably the strongest and most effective campaigning group, but also support group for not just LGBT people. Originally it was for gay, but now Stonewall supports lesbian, gay, bisexual, trans, non-binary. It's supporting a wide range of people who are gender diverse. And all of those changes came out. Stonewall wouldn't have happened had it not been for Section 28. Because without Section 28, there wouldn't have been the need for this huge push against negative regulation. Things had been moving slowly forward, and they would have carried on moving. But Section 28 added a huge impetus to it. It actually garnered an enormous level of support from people who previously hadn't even been involved, but who looked at this and thought, no, this is wrong. Because it was wrong. It was legislation designed to stifle self-expression, to prevent people from being themselves. It made it hugely difficult for children to deal with the fact that they were in a family where their brother or sister might be gay, their mother or parents, grandparents. If you were in a relation, in any family where there were gay people, the law said you couldn't promote that as normal. So it meant if it's not normal, it must be abnormal. That's pretty awful. So there we go. That's the sort of shift of that's happened and taken place. I'm going to stop my rant about Section 28 there. It's just a little bit of history. Huge, huge transformation. It brought about the biggest change of legislation that we've ever seen, and has basically been the foundation of the improvement in rights. So we now have pretty much equal rights. I'm not sure saying attitudes have changed. We've still got a long, long way to go with that. Still lots of hidden prejudice, lots of unconscious bias. But generally now, most people are accepting that, if you're gay, you're gay. If you're trans, you're trans. Well, maybe a little bit of problem with the radical feminists and a few religious groups, but we'll get there. So you can find all this on my YouTube channel, the podcast, Gender Speaker Live. Those are coming out on a regular basis. I've just been updating my YouTube channel, so please do go along there. Ricky Arundel, youtube.com/C Ricky Arundel. You'll find my YouTube channel. You'll also find on Wednesday, 11th of November, Remembrance Day, I shall be here, interviews and chat about gender salutations and pronouns. Now, this came about because the Professional Speaking Association, we have a private members group. On the group, somebody had a bit of a rant about the fact of there's a tendency to introduce people when you're introducing speakers, or at any meeting you're introducing, it's Mr. This, it's Mr. That, and it's Jenny. So we get deference to Mr. and we don't know whether Jenny is Ms. or Miss. So often it's just, well, it's Jenny or it's Ricky. And this is what happened to me. And we'll introduce, and we get, John Smith and Bill Full and the lovely Ricky. And all of a sudden, why am I lovely Ricky Arundel? Why the beautiful Ricky? Why the gorgeous? Why do we add these adjectives about someone's appearance because they're female, but we don't use those same kind of adjectives if it's male, if someone's male? And that actually becomes very demeaning, and women get very upset about it, understandably so. I was a bit shocked when it first started happening to me. Even more shocking, of course, is being introduced as he, as people just can't get themselves around the idea of pronouns. So what do they do if this is what we're going to be talking about. What are these issues around how we address people? How do we talk to people? How do we introduce people? How do we handle this in a world where we are trying to bring about equality and fairness, when the language is actually not allowing us to be fair? So that's going to be the debate and discussion on Wednesday. And I've got a few people, professional speakers and others, that I'm drawing into that. So we should have quite a good group to have a really good chat. Now, the week, the 13th to the 19th of November, and that's Friday, I think. So it runs. It's an odd time. It's the week run up, and I'll explain why this is in a minute. 13th to the 19th. It's always the 13th to the 19th. It's not just the nearest week to it. It's 13th to the 19th. Is Transgender Awareness Week, International Transgender Awareness Week. So across the world, this is a week for raising awareness about transgender issues. Trans and non-binary comes into this as well. Now, the reason it's the 13th and 19th is that this is the run-up to Transgender Remembrance Day, which is on the 20th of November. This year it's a Friday, but it's always the 20th of November. And I think this is year 20 or year 21 of this. It's 21 years since it first started. And this is a day in which we remember those trans people, mostly trans women, to be honest, but those trans people who have lost their lives just because they were trans. The bulk of it is South America. South America is not a very safe place if you're trans. But this year, I know that the number is over 300 people have been listed as having been murdered because they're transgender during the last 12 months. And this is just the ones we know about. It's not huge numbers in the UK. It's often only 1 or 2 people that we know about. America has been quite high this year. About 30 people in America have been killed because they're transgender. Sometimes we include into this number the transgender people who've taken their own lives. Once again, often these figures, these details aren't recorded, so it's very hard to find out because often families don't want people to know that the person was transgender or refuse to allow them to be buried as transgender. There's a lot of silliness that goes on here. Anyway, that's the 20th of November, so we're coming up to that. So I'll be talking a little bit more about that during next week and the week after. And because it's Transgender Awareness Week on the 17th, that's 9 days' time. This will be a week Tuesday. I'm going to be holding my first transgender and non-binary inclusion workshop. This is a 2-hour workshop looking at some of these a bit more concentrated down, very much focused on transgender in the workplace. How do we make sure that transgender and non-binary people are included, and you create an inclusive workplace where people want to work. If you can't bring your whole self to work and be yourself at work, then you can't be as effective. And we already know now that organizations that are very open, organizations that are inclusive of trans, LGBT, and disabled, gay. If you are an inclusive workplace, we know that organizations that are more inclusive are more profitable. They make more money. Staff stay longer. It's lower levels of turnover. It's a nicer place to work. So what can you do to make your workplace more inclusive? What can you do to make sure that your workplace is a place where everybody is there? So understanding the issues transgender people go through, that's the goal of that workshop. Come along. It's a donation basis is the way I'm running it. Pay what you can afford. I'd recommend £20, but if you can't afford that, that's fine. If you can do more, that's also fine. But come along. You'll find the details down in the notes below. And join me on Wednesday for a nice chat and discussion about how we address trans people, how we address people generally. This is not just about trans. This is about the issues of men and women and gender. And what do we do in this increasingly gender diverse world? How do we talk about and introduce and talk people so that they feel included, so that they feel that everything is equal? So there we go. That's our history shot for today. Glad you could join me. Those of you that have come live, I've got a couple of comments that are going on. Okay. Right. Thanks very much for the comment. I'm not quite sure I understand those, so I'm going to leave them for now. But thank you very much for joining me. Glad you could be here. I look forward to seeing you on Wednesday. And for now, let's see where my banners are. For now, let's head off. And that's it for now. Take care. Have a good week. See you on Wednesday.